For centuries, it has been called the most mysterious piece of cloth on earth. No crown jewels, no holy relics wrapped in gold have sparked more debate than this simple strip of linen. 14 feet long, faded, scorched, and scarred by fire, yet bearing the ghostly outline of a crucified man, the Shroud of Turin. For some, it is nothing less than the burial cloth of Christ himself. For others, it is the greatest forgery in history. But no matter which side you're on, one fact is undeniable: it refuses to go away. Kings and popes have fought to protect it, scientists have spent lifetimes trying to explain it, and millions of believers travel just to stand in its presence. And now, with the power of artificial intelligence, the Shroud has revealed something no one was prepared for. An image so detailed, so haunting, it has reignited one of the oldest debates in human history. Stay with us as we unravel the secrets, the scandals, and the shocking discoveries surrounding the Shroud of Turin. And if you want to follow every twist of this journey, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because what you're about to hear changes everything. It began not in Jerusalem, but in a small French village in the 14th century. No royal decree, no grand announcement, just a length of linen, quietly unveiled, carrying the faint, almost invisible image of a man who had been tortured and crucified. For years, it was treated with suspicion. Priests guarded it, pilgrims flocked to it, but scholars dismissed it as a curiosity. It was not jeweled or pristine. It bore scorch marks from fires, patches from repairs, stains no one could explain. But still, it survived. And then came 1898. A lawyer and amateur photographer named Secondo Pia was allowed to take the first photographs of the Shroud. When he developed the glass plate in his darkroom, what stared back at him froze him in place. The blurred, pale figure on the cloth transformed into a startlingly detailed image when viewed as a photographic negative. Suddenly, the face was there, eyes closed, beard, blood running across the forehead, wounds etched into the body. What had once been a faint smudge now looked like a perfect portrait. Scientists rushed to examine it, but what they found made even less sense. No pigments, no ink, no brush strokes. The image was not painted. It wasn't even absorbed into the fibers. It was sitting only on the very outermost layer, as if something had burned the cloth without ever touching it. A mystery wrapped in linen had just become a global obsession. The photograph didn't just reveal details, it raised impossible questions. How could a medieval artist have created a perfect photographic negative before the invention of photography itself? How could anyone in the Middle Ages have understood anatomy so well, down to the blood flow patterns of a crucifixion victim? Doctors studied the image and pointed to specific injuries: the scourge marks, the pierced wrists, the twisted posture of suffocation. Some scientists proposed theories that sounded more like science fiction than art. Radiation bursts, ultraviolet discharges, even some unknown energy blast that seared the image into the fibers. Others scoffed. They insisted it was a clever hoax, a relic meant to trick the faithful and draw pilgrims. But each new test only deepened the paradox. The image behaved like no other artifact in history, too precise to dismiss, too strange to explain. The Shroud had gone from a dusty relic in France to the most studied artifact in the world, and with every photograph, every microscope slide, the question grew louder. Was this cloth authentic, or the most elaborate forgery ever created? By the late 20th century, science had its chance to end the argument once and for all. In 1988, 3 of the world's leading laboratories, Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona, were chosen to perform carbon-14 dating on tiny fragments of the cloth. This was supposed to be the definitive test. No more speculation, no more theories, just hard science. The results came back quickly and hit like a bombshell. The linen, they said, dated between 1260 and 1390 AD, medieval. A forgery, case closed. Newspapers across the globe declared the mystery solved. Skeptics celebrated. Centuries of belief had been crushed in a single announcement. But almost immediately, the celebration collapsed under scrutiny. Textile experts pointed out that the sample had been taken from a corner of the shroud that had been badly damaged in a fire centuries earlier, and later repaired with new threads. Microscopic analysis revealed interwoven cotton mixed with the ancient linen, suggesting the sample wasn't representative of the whole cloth at all. If the carbon-14 test had been contaminated by these repairs, the results were meaningless. Confidence fractured. The Vatican stayed silent. Believers claimed victory, and scientists found themselves exactly where they had started, staring at a piece of cloth that refused to give up its secrets. For years, the controversy lay in limbo. The shroud remained an object caught between faith and skepticism, waiting for technology capable of probing deeper than carbon-14 ever could. That breakthrough arrived in 2022, when an Italian research team applied wide-angle X-ray scattering, technology normally reserved for advanced materials science, to the fibers of the cloth. What they found sent shockwaves through the academic world. Instead of pointing to the Middle Ages, the fiber degradation lined up with a radically earlier timeline, somewhere between 55 and 74 AD. The cloth wasn't medieval, it was ancient. Even more unsettling, isotope analysis of the flax fibers linked them not to Europe, but to the Levant, the very region where crucifixions by Roman soldiers had once been common. Under the microscope, the blood wasn't paint or pigment. It was real human blood, type AB, clotted into the fibers in ways consistent with violent trauma. And the wounds etched into the image matched exactly what historians know of Roman execution methods: scourging, crown of thorns, nails through the wrists, not the palms. The kind of detail medieval artists simply didn't have access to. The forgery verdict of 1988 suddenly looked like a scientific house of cards ready to collapse. With the dating reset to the 1st century, the conversation took an even stranger turn. Scientists returned to the idea that the shroud's image wasn't painted, but blasted onto the fibers by some unimaginable burst of energy. Radiation burst theory. The numbers were staggering. Billions of watts of energy discharged in a fraction of a second, enough to scorch the surface of the linen without penetrating the threads beneath. Some researchers admitted the data lined up almost perfectly with descriptions of a resurrection event, an instant where a body didn't just rise but transformed, leaving behind a photographic echo in cloth. The blood evidence added fuel. Trauma consistent with crucifixion, but no signs of decay. Whatever happened, the body wasn't there long enough to decompose. The image may have formed not by pressure or pigment, but during a physical to non-physical transition we have no modern framework to describe. To this day, no lab, no technology, no experiment has ever been able to recreate the shroud's image with the same complexity, the same three-dimensional depth, or the same microscopic precision. For science, the question was no longer, is it painted, but what kind of event could possibly burn an image like this into linen? And just as the mystery was reaching its peak, the 21st century handed it over to an entirely new player: artificial intelligence. The shroud was scanned, digitized, and fed into generative platforms like Mid-Journey. A simple text prompt was entered. Reconstruct the face, based on these markings. The result was not the glowing, idealized Christ of Renaissance art. It wasn't haloed or divine. What appeared was a hauntingly realistic face of a Semitic man. Dark features, bloodied, rugged, battered, yet strangely calm. A face shaped by trauma, but not defined by it. Within hours, the AI rendering was circulating across social media. Millions of people stared at the image, some convinced they were seeing the closest thing to a miracle ever generated by a machine. For others, it was unsettling proof that the Shroud was far more than legend. The digital age had entered the tomb, and what it revealed left the world divided, stunned, and desperate to know what comes next. That question was answered almost instantly, not by scientists, but by the crowd. As the rendering spread online, reactions ignited in every corner of the internet, some in awe, some in disbelief, many in furious debate. Historians who had spent years reconstructing the likely features of a first-century Jewish man were startled to see how closely the AI image aligned with their independent work. Yet the machine had not been trained on their research. The convergence felt uncanny, even unsettling. And then the public began to push the experiment further. New prompts were entered. Show the image forming through bursts of light. Visualize radiant scars glowing through cloth. Reconstruct a body at the instant of transformation. What came back was electrifying. Surreal visions of bodies hovering above linen. Beams of light searing across ancient fabric. Wounds shining like embers. Social feeds erupted with speculation. For the first time, technology was not just analyzing the Shroud, it was animating its mystery. And one question began to dominate every comment thread. Was this a glimpse, however imperfect, of what resurrection itself might have looked like? But the excitement didn't last long before a backlash set in. Experts in computer vision, theology, and history rushed to warn that people were being deceived by the very tool they were celebrating. Mid-Journey, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E. These systems are trained on millions of images scraped from across the internet. Countless paintings, sculptures, and films of Jesus have already been poured into their datasets. When the AI generated that haunting face, critics argued, it wasn't revealing anything. It was just remixing centuries of Christian iconography into something fresh. In other words, it was an illusion. The AI didn't know history. It didn't know forensic data. It was simply guessing pixels based on patterns it had seen before. To call it evidence, skeptics said, was a fundamental misunderstanding of what AI is and how it works. And yet, even as critics dismissed the images as nothing but digital noise, the strangeness lingered. Why did the AI's face look less like European medieval art and more like a historically accurate first-century Semitic man? Why did the proportions match forensic studies that AI had no direct knowledge of? Even hardened skeptics had to pause. Some suggested it was coincidence. Others hinted at unconscious bias in the algorithms that just happened to align with scholarship. But the unease remained. In trying to debunk the miracle, critics had accidentally underlined it. The machine had spit out something that, by sheer probability, should not have been so accurate. The very technology designed to expose illusions seemed to have stumbled into one of the deepest mysteries of them all. While the debate raged, forensic experts returned to the original cloth itself, determined to strip the AI controversy back to hard science. And what they found only made things stranger. Every wound visible in the Shroud's image lined up with what historians know of Roman crucifixion techniques. The nails weren't driven through the palms, as medieval artists had always depicted, but through the wrists, exactly where modern medical studies say the weight of a body could be supported. The scourge marks weren't random scratches. They matched the shape of a Roman flagrum whip. 2 or 3 leather thongs tipped with bits of bone or metal, leaving distinctive dumbbell-shaped wounds across the back and legs. Bloodstains trailed in directions consistent with a man hanging on a cross, shifting position as he struggled to breathe. This wasn't artistic invention. It was textbook trauma reconstruction. And still, after decades of study, one fact could not be denied. There was no paint, no pigment, no brushstrokes under magnification. The image wasn't soaked into the fabric like dye. It was confined to the very topmost fibers, thinner than a human hair, as if only the surface had been singed by some invisible energy. Even the best forgers of the Renaissance, masters who painted with microscopic precision, couldn't have produced an image so shallow, so uniform, and yet so detailed. Modern scientists, armed with lasers and radiation, still can't recreate it. One researcher described the shroud's image as a coded snapshot of something we don't understand. The deeper investigators dug, the more impossible it seemed. Blood spatter analysis showed patterns consistent with real arterial bleeding, not the clumsy daubs of an artist. Forensic pathologists confirmed that the stains weren't applied afterward. They had soaked into the cloth at the moment of injury, reacting chemically with the linen fibers. There was no sign of fakery. The blood itself had seeped into the weave, while the mysterious body image rested only on the outer surface. 2 different processes, fused together in one artifact. And hanging over all of it was a single comment from an expert who had studied the shroud his entire career. If this is fake, then it is the most advanced forgery in history. So advanced, we still don't know how it was done. The questions only grew sharper. Forensic science could not explain the image. AI had thrown its own vision into the debate. And in 2025, the Vatican chose not to resolve the controversy, but to place it on display. Quietly, without fanfare, a digital exhibition in Turin unveiled a new, high-resolution image of the shroud. For generations, the world had seen only blurred photographs, copies of copies. Now every fiber was visible, every thread illuminated. Pilgrims and skeptics alike filed past the relic, yet their gaze often shifted between the linen itself and the screens in their hands. They compared. They whispered. They held the centuries-old cloth against the freshly rendered face already burned into their imaginations. For some, it was a spiritual collision, faith and technology overlapping in a way that felt inevitable. For others, it was history, solidifying into sharper focus. Yet no one walked away untouched. Something about the dialogue between fabric and pixels, the ancient fibers whispering through modern algorithms, felt almost divine. But here's the paradox no one was ready for. The AI didn't solve the mystery. If anything, it only deepened it. People had expected clarity, a final unveiling that would sweep away centuries of doubt. Instead, the machine gave back an image that was almost too perfect, too aligned with hope, too unsettling in its suggestion. It was as if the algorithms themselves had paused and asked, what if this was real? The program didn't believe. It couldn't. It only processed. But in doing so, it exposed something humans hadn't been willing to face head-on. That maybe, just maybe, this was more than a relic. Maybe it was a record not of brushstrokes or medieval forgery, but of light itself, impressed into cloth by an event no science has yet explained. the implications unraveled quickly. AI wasn't offering proof. It wasn't waving a flag of certainty. It was presenting a possibility so haunting, so charged, that it forced people into confrontation. If this image wasn't proof of resurrection, then what was it? A bizarre natural phenomenon, a cosmic accident, or something otherworldly. Suddenly, the Shroud was no longer confined to dusty theological debates or forensic disputes. It was reborn as a global conversation. Cloth plus AI had unlocked a new chapter in the world's oldest riddle, and the irony couldn't be ignored. The most advanced tool of the 21st century had resurrected a question from the first. Experts, of course, remained as divided as ever. The camps lined up like armies across a battlefield that had been fought over for centuries. On one side, scholars dismissed it as nothing more than digital illusion, a modern echo of medieval fraud. Faith, they argued, had no place in data. On the other, believers saw vindication. How else could a machine with no belief, no bias, recreate an image so historically accurate that it matched forensic reconstructions and first-century features with startling precision? Could it all really be coincidence? The Vatican said little. Silence has always been its sharpest instrument. It neither endorsed nor denied the AI render, allowing the mystery to hang like incense over the faithful. Meanwhile, millions outside the walls of Turin debated furiously. Was this a relic or a riddle, a forgery, or the closest thing to evidence faith had ever possessed? What mattered more, the fact of its authenticity or the feeling it stirred in those who looked upon it? Because in the end, no one could deny one thing. This image, whether stitched by light 2,000 years ago or conjured by algorithms 2 months ago, was unlike anything else humanity had ever seen. It wasn't painted, it wasn't carved, it wasn't designed. It was imprinted on fabric, and now on us. AI hadn't given us answers. It had given us something more dangerous, feeling. And in an age drowning in facts, sometimes feeling is the one thing that can't be ignored. Which brings us back to the question that refuses to die. What really happened in that tomb? Was it the ultimate fraud of history, engineered by clever hands in a medieval monastery? Or was it the closest humanity will ever come to holding a photograph of the impossible? After centuries of microscopes, radiocarbon dating, forensic reconstructions, and now neural networks, we still don't know. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the Shroud resists explanation because it was never meant to be explained. Maybe its purpose isn't proof, but the pursuit of it. A relic that endures not because it answers, but because it refuses to. And here we are, centuries later, still chasing a shadow, scorched into linen, still unable to look away. What happened in that tomb remains the most persistent mystery in human history. And the truth, the one that science, faith, and now artificial intelligence all circle around, is that no matter how far we advance, some questions are destined to remain unanswered. The cloth still whispers, the pixels still glow, and humanity is left with a silence that feels louder than proof. So we're left to wonder if machines, with all their cold precision, can resurrect mystery instead of solving it, then maybe the Shroud isn't just about what happened 2,000 years ago. Maybe it's about us, our hunger for meaning, our fear of the unknown, and our refusal to stop asking the question. Because centuries later, even with AI on our side, we still don't know. And maybe we never will.